name is Penny, and I'm a Quality Improvement Advisor with Superior Health Quality Alliance. I'll be facilitating today's call along with my Superior Health colleagues, Allie Albers, Christy Fable, Katie Pashota, and Tony Kettner. Before I introduce our speakers for today's call, I want to take the time to review a few housekeeping items. We'll post the slide deck a few times into the chat box for your convenience. Please feel free to add questions and comments into the chat box as you think of them. We'll answer the questions at the end of the call. There'll also be an opportunity to ask live questions at the end of the call, and we'll review that process a bit later. This series is being recorded and will be available on the Superior Health YouTube channel in about 2 weeks. This will allow you and your team access to the recordings on demand when it's convenient for you. We will post an evaluation link at the end of today's call. We would appreciate it if you would take a few minutes and complete that for us. We use the evaluation to improve calls and to determine if there's other topics that you might find informational and helpful. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Brian Kazmarski and Amy Woolman-Nesseth. Welcome, Brian and Amy.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to apologize for not having my camera today. Brian is accusing me of having a bad hair day, and that may be the case. But anyway, no, I'm in a different location and I don't have my other camera. So again, this is session 4, series part 4 of our exercise evaluation and improvement planning series, our exercise design series. So again, if you don't know us by now, you will become familiar with us throughout this session today. So our objectives for today. When we do exercises, there's often this term that is thrown around called the hot wash. And if you are brand new to emergency preparedness or emergency preparedness exercises, you've probably wondered what on earth is a hot wash. So we're going to actually define that and talk about why it's important in the evaluation process of exercises. We're going to talk about some of the other tools that we use to gather information, not only from the participants in the exercise, but also the evaluators, as well as the facilitators and controllers. And the reason we are going to talk about those tools is because we use many different opportunities to gather information to put together what is called the executive summary and improvement plan. And that is part of the after action report. That is really the reason that we do our emergency exercises, is because the after action report and the improvement plan allow us to identify areas for improvement in our plans, in our organization, in maybe the equipment or the processes that we have developed for emergency response. And so again, we don't do exercises just because we're required to do them. We do them because we really want to get better at our emergency response so that when the big bad day does happen, we are ready and can do everything possible to preserve the life of the people who are in our care, as well as infrastructure and all those other things that come along with that. And then finally, Brian's going to talk about some of the tools and tips to improve that process of evaluation and improvement planning. Again, that being the reason that we are doing these emergency exercises in the first place. But first, let's review a couple things from our previous sessions. Remember that we are really encouraging you to not start with the scenario, but to start with the capabilities that you are wanting to test. Because when you start with the capabilities and then build objectives around those capabilities, then you can create a scenario that is going to drive the players to test and to discuss and to actually look at the plans around the capabilities that you want to test. Most of the time, in almost every exercise, you're going to be testing some form of operational coordination and some form of operational communication. But there will be other types of capabilities that you will include in your exercises based on what your identified risks are, as well as what your staff needs in terms of ongoing training and education. Remember, exercises can be as simple as games or drills or seminars. They don't have to be the full scale lights and sirens, everybody boots on the ground, we're going to evacuate the building kind of an exercise. Start small and then build on each of those games or drills or exercises to the point where you are doing a more full scale or a larger functional exercise, but you don't have to start there. And we really encourage you not to start there, because your staff will become overwhelmed and you'll lose that momentum. And then when you're in the process of developing the tools that you're going to use during your exercise, make sure that you're using the forms and the communication tools that you would use in a real event. That again is a great way to practice and become familiar with what those tools and platforms would be. And we want to make sure if we're practicing that people become familiar with what we would actually use in a real event. And don't forget to test your redundant communications. So I'm just going to touch base real quick again on the exercise evaluation guides. We spent a lot of time talking about this. The place to find that is under the HCEP toolkit, and then you'd click on in the circle of the emergency preparedness cycle, you would click on the evaluation color, and you will see these templates that come up at the very bottom of the screen there. The thing we want to emphasize is that when you develop your exercise evaluation guides, use this as a template. Really, with your individual activities and tactics should come from your written emergency operations plan or your checklists. That's how you're going to test if the plan and the process that you have in place for each capability is actually going to work. And if it doesn't work, then that's the opportunity to make an improvement in your plan. So again, the language and the terminology can be a little bit confusing. If you use the HCEP toolkit, they're going to talk about capabilities, capability targets, and critical tasks. We are going to talk about them as capabilities, activities, and tactics. The other thing that I think we maybe haven't touched on before is that the exercise evaluation guides are organized by the 5 phases of the emergency management cycle. So again, these are the 5 phases that we have become familiar with. When you open the HCEP toolkit, you can see that if you're really focusing on prevention and you click that, you're going to have a bunch of EEGs that are already completed in terms of the capabilities. They are not going to have the activities and tactics completed because they're wanting you to pull that from your individual plans. These are designed to be modified and tweaked to meet your needs and to meet what you are trying to test. So just use these as a place to start, knowing that you are going to be making changes and additions to whatever exercise evaluation guide and capability you are going to be testing. So then we're going to actually talk about the evaluation. Last week we talked about the conduct. So now we've actually had our exercise. However long you have decided to do that, whether it was an hour-long discussion based exercise or whether it was a much larger full-scale or functional exercise. And at the very end, the facilitator or the controller is going to say, okay, we have now reached the end of our exercise, and we are now going to transition into the hot wash. And again, what is a hot wash? And the hot wash actually comes from a term that is used in the U.S. Army. And this is the definition that comes from one source that I found. It talks about that process of just quickly dunking the weaponry into a hot water bath, basically, to make the cleaning process go smoother down the road. I've also heard it described as when a battle has been completed, that as the soldiers are gathering together, that the hot wash, it refers to that time where they're just immediately sharing their feedback from the experience of the battle, for example. So in terms of emergency preparedness, what on earth how does that translate? And what it really is intended to do is to capture the immediate reactions and responses to the exercise. That's why it is completed at the very end of the exercise, before people get a chance to really walk away and start to process everything. It's intended to be conducted with all players, evaluators, facilitators, controllers, anybody that had a part in the exercise itself. It's not expected to be long. It should be maybe 15-20 minutes at the very end of the exercise. And it's intended to capture those reactions. What went well? What didn't go so well? And oftentimes the facilitator will start with the evaluators and say, let's hear some of your observations about this capability. And then the participants get a chance to talk about what they witnessed or what they experienced during the exercise. And the goal is that eventually, at the end of the hot wash, that the group can reach somewhat of a consensus of what were the top strengths of this exercise, what did we really do well, or what was a really strong result of this exercise, and then the 3 top opportunities. And often you will have more than 3, but the hot wash gives you an opportunity to try to reach that consensus, or at least to hear what the themes are in terms of what needs to be improved. And keep in mind that when we do these evaluations, we're not criticizing individuals, we're not criticizing individual actions, but we're looking at the processes, we're looking at the plans and the protocols. We're looking at how can we as an organization improve our systems or our checklists or our processes so that we can be more successful in the event of a real incident. So that's one piece of the evaluation process, is the hot wash. The second one is what we call the participant feedback form. There is a template that is available in the HCEP toolkit, but to be quite honest with you, I find it very icky. It's not very helpful, in my opinion. But again, it's a place to start. You can customize your participant feedback in whatever way you want to customize it. So for example, if you are interested in whether people found the scenario to be realistic, you can add that question. You can create whatever questions you want to get feedback on. You know, was the facilitator truly having a bad hair day? Did you like the goodies that were provided, you know, for the snacks? You can write whatever you want in your participant feedback form. If you use the template, oftentimes what people will do is they'll print off this form and just pass it out, you know, just like at any other conference. People ask for evaluations of their presentations before they leave the room, kind of thing. You can do a handwritten form if you wish. What we have found more success with is using SurveyMonkey or some other survey tool, because of lots of reasons. One of them is that you can easily incorporate the graphics into an after action report. It's anonymous, and people oftentimes will feel better about giving honest feedback if they don't have a name or handwriting associated with it. And then it also gives you a visual, depending on how you utilize the feedback that you receive. So most people are very comfortable with, electronically clicking on a survey link. The key is to make sure you get that link out sooner than later so that you can capture people's real-time experience and evaluation. And then make sure that you have created that survey. Obviously, there's no template here. You would need to create the survey to gather the type of information that you really want to gather. So when it's all said and done, there are at least 4 different kinds of evaluation tools that will help us put together what we call that executive summary and improvement plan and that after action report. So that includes the exercise evaluation guides from your evaluators. That includes that hot wash. So make sure you have somebody taking notes during that hot wash discussion so that they can capture the themes and some of the things that people will bring up. The facilitator and controllers will often have observations that you can ask them to write down as well. I have facilitated many exercises for nursing homes and hospitals, and there are certain observations, how one hospital does it differently than another hospital, or what process seems to work really well versus what actually happened, or vice versa. So sometimes those observations can be helpful. And then, of course, gathering your participant feedback forms. So you're actually getting that feedback. And all of that is going to be combined to put together this executive summary and improvement plan. Now, the question is, when do you write an after action report? And I will tell you that this is really a key document, especially after every real event, because don't forget, real events, whenever you open your incident action plan or emergency operational plan or incident command system, you can use that real event as a replacement for an exercise if you write the after action report and the improvement plan. That is what the surveyors are going to be looking for, to see that you've actually learned from the real event. So if you have a real event, make sure you are capturing notes and actually doing things like a hot wash, or things like writing that improvement plan. Whenever you have community partners involved, consider writing an after action report, because again, one of the things that is required under the CMS emergency preparedness ruling is that you are demonstrating that you are not just being a silo within your community, but you are actually reaching out to your community partners and working with them for emergency response. And then, of course, if you're doing a tabletop, a functional, or a full-scale exercise, you really should be writing an after-action report. If you're doing a game or a drill or having a seminar, that's less important. But if you're doing any of these, whether it's discussion or action-based, you want to make sure that you are capturing that. And I just want to make one final reminder here that a full-scale exercise in CMS language is not the same as a full-scale exercise in FEMA language. So when we're talking full-scale community-based exercise in CMS, we're really talking about a functional exercise, that do versus discuss. It's not the lights and sirens, we're going to evacuate the entire building kind of exercise. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Amy, and hello, everyone. Albeit from Amy, I'm having a terrific hair day, I think, so I'm feeling really good about the next several slides. We're going to jump into some improvement plan templates. And again, our go-to has always been that HC toolkit. Again, you don't have to be HC compliant necessarily, but we really do think they are a best practice. When you get there, again, as Amy mentioned, there's the different headings or subheadings. The improvement planning templates are no different. You click on that, you'll get the drop down of the two templates that you see on the screen right now. The first one is the AARIP template. That's your meat and potatoes. That is the I would say the foundation for any after action documentation. And then any after action meetings such as hot wash, participant feedback meetings, things like that. And again, they're just guides to get you through that process. Exciting. So the elements of an after action report. And again, these are just our recommendations and the tools that we have been pointing you to literally walk you through this process. So don't feel like you're going to miss something. You simply follow the templates and they're going to guide you through that process. So typically what these documents ask for is an exercise overview. Sometimes that may be a scenario. Often though, what they're looking for there is simply a description of the capabilities that are being tested. So whatever you chose as capabilities way back during exercise design and development, that's the information that you're going to be putting in that particular area. Then the event summary. And again, on the event summary, don't try to recreate the wheel. If during the exercise you created PowerPoint slides and those PowerPoint slides were your sit reps or your updates, literally what Amy and I do is we copy and paste that information right into the event summary. And that becomes the description of your scenario. So use the resources as efficiently as you possibly can. Then you get into the humidity affecting me. That's funny. I like that. The analysis of capabilities follows that event summary. And really what they're asking you to do there, again, is go back to your capabilities and you're going to perform an analysis of those capabilities. Basically, what went well, what could be improved, and then any other relevant pertinent information that would be specific to that particular capability. The conclusion is really a list of your participants, those who played, and then a summary of feedback. The improvement plan is typically the last piece of the overall after action report. And it looks a little bit different than the remainder of the report or, bulk of the report. And we'll show you examples of what that looks like. And again, you can do this through either writing a report, holding a meeting, or a combination of both. Next slide. So this is an example of an HC compliant exercise overview and event summary. So this is straight out of the HC toolkit. And this is an example of basically what we talked about on the previous slide. What is the name of your exercise? What were your exercise dates? What is the scope of the exercise? That kind of talks about how broad you want that exercise to be. Mission area. Mission and area are those phases of the emergency preparedness cycle. So maybe it's preparedness, maybe it's coordination, maybe it's response, maybe it's recovery. Okay, you have the ability to lay out the areas of the emergency preparedness cycle that your scenario is designed to fit in. And then you can see the core capabilities. For this one, they chose EOC, they chose information sharing, they chose continuity of health, and they chose medical surge. Now, I would look at that personally, and if I was a fledgling agency in terms of emergency response, I would say that's too many capabilities. I would keep it down to around that 2 or 3. The recommendation for well-trained, those that feel like they're pretty comfortable in this world, 3 to 5 is a good recommendation for capabilities. So what Amy and I are really trying to say is don't bite off more than you can chew. The objectives go right underneath that. And remember, your objectives are tied back to your core capabilities. And you simply list them out. You're not describing them. You're not saying whether you completed them successfully or not. You are simply listing them out. And then typically it will ask you what type of threat or hazard is your scenario. And you just indicate what it is. We're trying to mitigate an infectious disease outbreak. We're preparing for an MCI. We are preparing for, this is one, if you really want to challenge yourself, that I've started to see more and more of. Some agencies are actually creating exercises that mimics when their surveyors come on site. They are making that their exercise. And when you think about it, it's kind of brilliant because you're getting practice runs, dress rehearsals for when your surveyors do come on site. So an example of that would be in the long-term care facility world, develop an exercise that knock, knock, hey, CMS, we're here, ready, set, go. And you can lay that out in a way that is not necessarily going to stress your staff, but it's going to give them the chance to see how that process is going to work. And it's only going to lead to a better outcome for your CMS. We see it very often in the hospital world when they get joint commission. Joint commission oftentimes shows up, the absolute worst time. So they literally build exercises that mimic that, and they'll declare an exercise and they'll say, Joint Commission is on site. Please activate your Joint Commission protocol. So just some things to think about outside the box in terms of the standard scenarios that we're all familiar with. Next slide. So this would be the same thing as the slide before, but really in more of a narrative format. So you can see that essentially it's covering all of the information that we talked about on the previous slide. It's just doing it in a different format. Neither way is better than the other. You're not going to get dinged one way or the other. It's just different examples of how you can accomplish the same task. Next slide, Amy. The analysis of capabilities. This is one that does confuse people. Back when HCEP was a requirement, this was the area that most people struggled with. And really the analysis of capabilities is taking each capability and breaking it down. And what it's asking you to break it down into is, number one, objectives. Then it says, well, what capability is that objective tied to? And then it gets into what I call the 3 up, 3 down. So for this particular one, again, pick an imaginary objective, pick a capability that ties to that objective. And out of all of your observations, they can come from your evaluators, they can come from your players, they can come from your facilitators, they can come anywhere. But you're going to come up with what your group, by aggregating, all of the different strengths together into buckets, into themes, you're going to come up with what your 3 strengths are. And you would simply list them out in that format. The areas of improvement, it's going to break it down a little bit differently. You can see on this one, it says the following areas require improvement to achieve the full capability level. And it says area for improvement 1. And it always asks that you start with an observation statement. You don't necessarily get right into the area of improvement. And it's a subtle difference, but what they're looking for is, what did you see that was wrong that made you think we needed to improve that particular area? So really it's asking for a root cause, and then it's asking for what is the possible solution to that root cause. So just keep that in mind. And then the reference piece, that reference piece is basically saying, well, if you saw something that was incorrect, how do you know it was incorrect? Well, it's because I was referencing this particular part of their plan, and I saw that they missed steps 3, 4, and 5. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. When you're listing the references out, it's what foundational piece of the emergency response plan, protocol, or activities were you referencing when you noticed that gap? And then it just repeats that through however many areas of improvement that you identify. Usually in the areas of improvement, the templates identify that they preload opportunities to list 3 areas of improvement. If you found a capability that you just crashed and burned on and you found 6 or 7 areas of improvement, you just add and keep adding. You just copy and paste the little template that it has for you, and you keep entering in those corrective actions and areas of improvement until you've satisfied that particular capability. Next slide, Amy. The analysis of incident core capability performance. Again, really fancy language for saying how well did they accomplish that particular core capability. So if you look on the very top of this table, it's got 3 rows. Envision 3 core capabilities that are put in there. The rating on the right is reflective of the rating definitions below that. Typically what you'll see is P, S, and M. The way I look at it is P is proficient. You knocked it out of the park. You did really, really good on that particular capability. I usually correlate S to satisfactory. You achieved the capability, but there were opportunities to do it more efficiently, or add nuances to it that would make it more beneficial the next time that you needed to bring that capability up and running. So if you're thinking in terms of teaching and education, the P is an A. The satisfactory would be like a B- or a C+. And then the last one, the M, that I relate that to, you didn't do so good on that capability, and therefore we're probably going to have a significant number of areas of improvement when we get into that scoring piece of the analysis of capabilities. Yeah, mediocre would be a good way to describe that. And then again, that leads you into your analysis of capabilities. So a lot of times they'll have you score the capabilities first. You would do it on the table that you're seeing here, and then it breaks it down into the analysis of capabilities. So if I scored it as an M, I have the ability to explain in detail why I chose to score it that way. Next slide. Some of the conclusion documents, sometimes Amy and I refer to these as tabs or appendices to the overall after action report. But one of them that's very common is a list of participating agencies. An example of that would be on the left. Typically, we put that at the end of the after action report. And you may say, if you create a table of contents at the beginning of the after action report, you may say refer to tab A or appendix A for a list of participating organizations. As Amy mentioned, the image on the right is the visual of the participant feedback form. Again, very often we'll put it in that format. That'll become tab B or appendix B of the overall after action report. And again, it's just a very clean way of a surveyor coming in and saying, show me your most recent after action report, and they can easily navigate that tool, that document, to get to the information that they're looking for. Next slide. And again, as Amy has really stressed and emphasized, that they produce these templates in Word format for a reason. They expect modifications. Okay. This is a bunch of people that created these documents at a federal level, and they said this would be perfect to apply to all 50 states, all 17 provider types, yada yada yada. We know that that doesn't work, so tweak these babies to suit your needs. So what we're looking at right here now is a 2-page executive summary and improvement plan. This is actually a document that Amy and I created as a way to try to get participating agencies to not be so stressed out about participating in exercise. And one of the ways, one of the areas that we found that did stress agencies out the most is that knowledge that they had to write that formal after action report at the end. So envision having a regional exercise or multiple players in an exercise, and then writing an after action report from that higher level perspective. You're writing it from a regional perspective. Maybe it's from a jurisdictional perspective. What this 2-page document does is it allows each entity that participated in that exercise to provide their own unique contribution. So another way to say that is the executive summary and improvement plan is a reflection of one agency or one key player. And we purposely stripped it down to a 2-page document so it would be less intimidating, more easy for that entity to fill out. And all of a sudden we started to see higher rates of participation in exercises because agencies knew there wouldn't be so much legwork on the backside. They knew they were going to get an overall regional perspective of the exercise or real event. And then each of them were going to get their own respective tabs that would, number one, simplify the process for them. And number two, this is very clear evidence that their agency participated in the exercise. So a way to visualize this is when you're all said and done with your after action report, you may have a 10 to 15 page document that talks about things from a global perspective. Again, County A had this exercise, so they're going to write the report from that perspective. And then you may see tab 1, list of participating agencies, tab 2, participant feedback summary, and then tabs 3 through 20 would be unique executive summary improvement plans for each entity that played in that exercise. Package that all together and you've got your completed after action report. And it's done, again, the majority, the bulk, the legwork is done for you at a higher level. As you as an individual agency really are only responsible for that 2-page document. Amy, did I miss anything on how we kind of lay that out and the rationale for why we created that 2-page executive summary?
Nope, I think you nailed it. The thing that is important, the reason we're talking about this in such depth is because if you have registered for an exercise with us coming up, starting in just a couple of weeks, this is what you will be required as a participating agency to complete so that Brian and I can write the global after action report with up to 25 participants. So in each exercise, so or organizations in each exercise. So just know that whatever you write on here, whatever you write in your improvement plan will become part of that global document. And some of our documents, our after action reports, end up being, depending on the number of participants, 50, 60 pages. But you will get a copy of that electronically, and then you can always pull out your executive summary and improvement plan to show to the surveyor. But it's also an opportunity for learning from other organizations about what were some of the things that they identified as opportunities for improvement, because that may be the case for you as well.
I want to emphasize what Amy just said. To be honest with you, when we first introduced this concept for people that we were preparing to do exercises for, we really got a lot of pushback. And the pushback we got was, I don't want other agencies seeing where we screwed up. And so we needed to do some education on them to be able to say, we're all going to mess up during this exercise. This is a QI process. This is a way to look and see if there are some really good best practices that a couple agencies might be using, and what better way to adopt those best practices to spread the love, so to speak, so that other agencies can start doing the same thing if they so choose. Once we explained it to them that way, we really got good buy-in. Next slide. So this is the piece of that executive summary improvement plan, that 2-page document that personally I think is the most important one. And this is the actual improvement plan. So it'll be the last part of that 2-page document. The executive summary will come before that. And I think we talked about improvement plans before, but essentially you're taking your target capability, you're writing down what you observed that didn't go as well as you wanted it to. Then you're putting in corrective action. Then you're assigning the agency responsible. It could be your agency, but guess what? You might identify something that is actually the responsibility of an outside agency. And that's okay. I mean, that's part of the process. Community response, all hazards response. Think about that. If you discover something that, you know what, in our plan, it says that agency X is responsible for this. So we're going to write that down in here and note that agency X is responsible for this particular corrective action. The only kicker on that is make sure you inform agency X that you have an expectation that they work on that particular corrective action. And a lot of times what we find out is agency X easily could have accomplished that function. They literally didn't know they were responsible for it. So it goes into that whole piece of, if you're injecting outside partners into your plans as having certain roles and responsibilities, make very clear that they know what those roles and responsibilities are. And very early in the exercise design process, it becomes very apparent, because that's when those gaps in communication are usually identified. There's one other thing I wanted to point out on this one. There's agency responsible. Sometimes you can drill it right down to one individual that is responsible for that. The recommendation that we have for that is title, not individual name. And that's simply because of turnover. So the title is usually going to stay the same. The individual's name is going to come and go. The completion date, how do you determine what a completion date is on a corrective action? Well, HCEP tells you. HCEP will tell you that you have 180 days from identifying corrective action and informing the agency responsible that it's theirs to fix. So from that day, it's called 0. 180 days from there is your target date for completion. On the bottom there, some forms will ask you about capability elements, and that just means there will be another column wedged in there somewhere. And really what they're saying, if it says capability element, they're saying, what bucket of things does this corrective action fit into? So if you write down that a certain piece of a response plan needed some updating, needed some refining, it needed to be flushed out more, the capability element would be plans, and you would just document that there. And all that's saying is that particular corrective action falls into the buckets of plan quality improvements. If you happen to go through an exercise and you want to test some secondary tactical communications equipment, and you find out that they don't work, you're going to indicate that, and that is going to become an equipment corrective action. Maybe you have created the greatest plan in the world, but you forgot to train your staff up on it. That's going to turn into a training corrective action. Hopefully that starts to make sense. Not all improvement plans will have that column. We just want you to be aware of it. Next slide. Same as with your, from your capabilities to your objectives, we do recommend that you write your corrective actions on your improvement plan utilizing the SMART format. And just remember that time-bound frame. It can be 180 days. 180 days is allowable. If it's something that your exercise design team feels, hey, if we just sit down and tackle this, we could get this done in 2 weeks. We could get this done in a month. It's okay to indicate a shorter period of time for completion. 180 days is just kind of the max. Next slide, Amy. So again, tips for writing those corrective actions. Throughout the entire process, the corrective actions are they're gonna bubble to the surface. It's going to be easy to identify what those corrective actions are. Our biggest advice to you is don't bite off too much. Okay. If you have wholesale changes that you need to make in your communications plan, maybe you want to take a chunk at a time instead of trying to tackle the whole thing. Following through piece is huge. You need to make sure that you show your surveyors that you are closing the loop. They're clearly going to see where you've identified corrective actions on the improvement plan. They will literally ask, show me how you fix that, or show me where that corrective action landed. And you need to be prepared to say, okay, for this particular one, we went into this section of our response plan and we updated this particular area. That's the type of stuff that your surveyors are looking for. Or using the equipment analogy, show us how you fix that. Well, here's our old radios sitting in the corner collecting dust. Here's our new radios that, because of an identified corrective action, we were able to purchase with some emergency response funds. And then the last thing that we recommend, if you found a boo-boo and fixed it from a prior exercise or real event, real good way to test that you have closed the loop is to build it into your next exercise. And then you have a very real, purposeful way of measuring whether or not you actually did close that. Next slide. And as always, we leave you with those cute little cartoon YouTube videos. You may think they're corny. I know you've seen them over the course of the last 4 videos or 4 webinars. They're really done in a simplistic way, and they're very easy to follow, and they actually do help. Amy and I do use these, even though we consider ourselves relatively efficient in the area of exercise design. I still find myself referencing these. So that's why we've been hammering this slide home to you guys. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Amy to see if she has any final comments, and then we will turn it back over to our Superior Health colleagues.
Yeah, I really don't, other than thank you for being a part of this series. We hope that it has given you some tips and tools to work with, because exercising is here to stay. And if you take the opportunity to get some experience with it, I think you'll find that it may not be as daunting as you once feared. But just know that there are many resources out there for you. So, and feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have additional questions.
Okay. Were there any questions in the chat that we need to address?
Amy, oh, there you go. Thank you. While we're waiting for participant questions, I have a question. Is there, you had mentioned like keep things simple, keep things fun, it could be games, that kind of thing that you're using. Is there any like a repository that you're aware of where someone has already kind of created some of those sort of opportunities that somebody could just go to and pull something out?
Well, yes, there are. I mean, in terms of emergency preparedness, well, number one, September is Emergency Preparedness Month. And so that is coming up just right around the corner. If you go to ready.gov, you will find that's a federal website, but every state also has a ready.gov website. And there are often little video snippets or flyers or other kinds of links that you can easily integrate into a staff meeting or into your social media page or into your family newsletter or, you know, staff training, whatever it is that you're looking for. If you spend a little bit of time, you know, Googling, it's amazing what's out there. If you're looking for something that's a little more formal, the Asper Tracie, TRACIE website, you can easily get lost there. It's a very large repository of documents. But there's a feature there, if you register, which is completely free. They do have what's called a technical assistance option. And if you are looking for a specific document or a specific type of exercise, you can make a request and say, hey, I'm a long-term care facility and we're looking at, you know, focusing on this kind of threat. We live in Wisconsin, and can you point us to some games, tools, drills that would be helpful? And it may take them a few weeks to get back to you, but they will actually come up with a list of resources that you will be able to utilize. So I have done that several times when I've been preparing for presentations or exercises. You just have to think far enough ahead to make that request. But yes, there are things out there. And it's, you know, use your creativity. I mean, there's ways to create Jeopardy games and, you know, TikTok or not TikToks too, but, you know, crossword puzzles and things like that. So if you're doing something for a special kind of week of education, there are resources out there. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you very much. I have little light bulbs going off, so very helpful. Thank you.
Are there any other questions that anyone would like to address? Either come off mute or *6 if you're on the phone and have anything that you would like to ask, or Katie, if there was anything in the chat. No, we're all good.
Just remember, folks, I always get emotional at the end of, like, you know, these things. So it's we're not saying goodbye. We're saying see you soon. So make sure you sign up for one of those exercises.
Yeah.
I was just, the slide went away, but yes, I was just gonna talk a little bit about the upcoming virtually facilitated tabletop exercises that are being offered in September of this year through September of next year. This will help you meet the CMS requirements for the full-scale community-based exercise, so please sign up for one. Help you test your functional elements of your emergency plan, complete the required documentation, and receive an after action report from Optima EP. And there's the registration information right there. I'll also just posted it in the link. So the words look funny, but it's the link to the CMS requirement, the virtually facilitated tabletop exercise. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, please be sure to send them to Tony Kettner at Superior Health. And if there's nothing else, I'd just like to say thank you to Amy and to Brian for the information that you shared. It was pretty amazing. It'll help us all get better prepared for any emergencies that may occur in our organizations. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. We really appreciate that you're here. So thank you. Thanks again.